I attended my wife's workplace social dinner party and saw that my place card said, "Clueless, idiot, trash." My wife, her lover, male boss, and her coworkers laughed out loud. "Beggar!" they shouted. But when I was about to go home, I told the president, "I'm cutting ties with you. My name is Jared Winslow, and if you told me 6 months ago that I'd be sitting here in my workshop at 2 in the morning, surrounded by sawdust and the ghosts of what used to be my marriage, I would have laughed in your face. But here I am, running my fingers along the grain of this mahogany table I'm building, trying to make sense of how everything went so damn wrong so fast. Let me back up. For the past 8 years, I've been married to Bianca Winslow. Well, technically, she kept her maiden named Martinez for professional reasons, but you get the picture. She's what you'd call a rising star at Reinhardt & Rowe, one of those high-end design firms downtown where they charge $5,000 just to tell you what color to paint your bathroom. Me, I run Craftwise Builds, my own little woodworking company that I started in our garage and somehow managed to turn into something decent. Nothing flashy, mind you. I'm not building custom yachts or anything crazy like that. Just honest work. Kitchen cabinets, built-in bookshelves, maybe a dining room table for someone's anniversary. The kind of stuff that lasts longer than the people who buy it. Bianca always said she was proud of what I did, especially when her fancy coworkers needed something made and I'd give them the friends and family discount. "My husband's a real craftsman," she'd tell them. And I'd feel that warm glow you get when the person you love actually sees you for who you are. Or at least, that's what I thought was happening. About 3 weeks ago, she came home from work with this weird energy. Part excited, part nervous, like a kid who knows they're about to get caught doing something they shouldn't. She was standing in our kitchen, still in that sharp black blazer she wears when she wants to look important. And she just blurted it out. "The company's having their annual social dinner next Friday. You should come with me." Now, this might not sound like a big deal to you, but Bianca had never invited me to one of these things before. In 8 years of marriage, I'd heard about plenty of company events, the Christmas parties, the summer barbecues, the team-building weekends in the Hamptons. But I was never part of the equation. "It's just work stuff," she'd always say. "You'd be bored out of your mind." And honestly, I was fine with that. I figured hanging out with a bunch of pretentious designers talking about Fune and sustainable materials wasn't exactly my scene anyway. But this time was different. She was practically bouncing on her heels when she asked me. And there was something in her voice that made me think this actually mattered to her. Maybe she finally wanted to show me off, you know. Maybe after all these years of keeping her work life and her home life in separate boxes, she was ready to let them overlap a little. "Really?" I asked, setting down the beer I'd been nursing. "You want me there?" "Of course I do," she said, and she gave me that smile, the one that made me fall for her in the first place. Back when we were both broke college kids and the future felt like this wide-open road we were going to travel together. "It'll be fun, good food, good wine. And you'll finally get to meet everyone I work with." I should have paid more attention to the way she said everyone. There was something off about it, like she was testing out the word to see how it tasted, but I was too busy feeling flattered to notice the warning signs. "What's the dress code?" I asked, already mentally going through my closet. I had maybe 2 suits that didn't smell like what would stain, and one of them still had a small burn mark from when I'd gotten too close to the Sanders last winter. "Just wear your navy suit," she said, already pulling out her phone to text someone. "The one you wore to my cousin's wedding. You looked really handsome in that." The way she said it, casual and distracted, made me feel like I was already an afterthought in her planning. But I pushed that feeling down. This was supposed to be a good thing, right? My wife wanted me by her side at an important work event. That had to mean something. Over the next week, I found myself actually looking forward to it. I got the suit dry cleaned, bought a new tie. Nothing too flashy, just a simple dark blue that would blend in without making me look like I was trying too hard. I even watched a few YouTube videos about wine tasting just in case the conversation went in that direction. I wanted to make a good impression, not just for me, but for Bianca. I knew how much her career meant to her. And if being a good husband meant smoozing with her boss and pretending to care about the difference between eggshell and ivory paint, then that's what I was going to do. The night before the dinner, I was in the workshop putting the finishing touches on a jewelry box I'd been making for our anniversary. Just a small thing. Walnut with cherry inlays. The kind of piece that takes forever to get right, but feels worth it when you finally do. Bianca came down to tell me she was going to bed, and she paused in the doorway like she wanted to say something else. "You nervous about tomorrow?" I asked, not looking up from the delicate work I was doing on the hinges. "No," she said, but there was something in her voice that suggested otherwise. "Are you?" I set down my tools and turned to look at her. She was wearing that old Princeton t-shirt she'd had since college, and her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. And for a second, she looked exactly like the girl I'd married. Young and uncertain and beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with the expensive clothes and perfect makeup she wore to work. "Should I be?" I asked. She was quiet for a long moment, and I got the feeling she was having some kind of internal debate with herself. Finally, she shook her head and gave me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "No," she said. "Everything's going to be fine." That should have been my second warning sign, but like an idiot, I believed her. Everything was not going to be fine. Friday rolled around faster than I expected, and by the time 6 hit, I was already feeling that familiar knot in my stomach that comes with trying to fit into someone else's world. I'd spent the better part of the afternoon getting ready, showering twice because the first time I still smelled like the pine I'd been working with all week, shaving carefully around that scar on my jaw from a router accident 3 years back, and making sure my navy suit looked as good as it was going to get on a guy who spends most of his time in work boots and flannel shirts. Bianca had been getting ready upstairs for what felt like hours, and when she finally came down the stairs, I swear my heart stopped for a second. She was wearing this navy silk dress that hugged her in all the right places, and her dark hair was pulled back in some kind of elegant twist that probably took her an hour to perfect. The woman knew how to make an entrance. I'll give her that. "Damn, babe," I said, standing up from the couch where I'd been nervously checking my phone. "You look absolutely stunning." She paused at the bottom of the stairs and smoothed down the front of her dress, but instead of giving me that please smile I was expecting, she just kind of nodded and said, "Thanks." Not "thank you," not "you look great too." Just a flat, distracted thanks, like I'd commented on the weather. That should have been my first clue that something was off, but I was too busy trying to be supportive to really process it. Maybe she was just nervous about the dinner. Right. Big work events can be stressful, especially when you're trying to climb the corporate ladder at a place like Reinhardt and Rowe. "Ready to go?" I asked, grabbing my keys from the bowl by the front door. "I guess," she said, which wasn't exactly the enthusiastic response I was hoping for. The drive to the venue took about 20 minutes, and I spent most of it trying to make conversation while Bianca stared out the passenger window like she was watching a movie I couldn't see. I tried talking about work first, told her about this new project I'd landed building custom cabinets for a young couple who'd just bought their first house. Usually she liked hearing about my clients, especially the ones who were just starting out, and reminded us of ourselves when we were younger and broker. "That's nice," she said, but I could tell she wasn't really listening. So I switched gears and asked about her work instead. "How's that hotel lobby project coming along? The one downtown with all the crazy lighting requirements?" "Fine," she said. "It's fine." I tried one more time, bringing up something completely different. This documentary I'd watched about traditional Japanese woodworking techniques that I thought she might find interesting since she was always going on about the importance of craftsmanship and design. But all I got was another distracted nod and a that told me her mind was somewhere else entirely. By the time we pulled into the parking lot of the venue, some upscale place called the Meridian that looked like it charged $50 just to walk through the front door, I was starting to feel like I was taking a stranger to prom. The woman sitting next to me looked like my wife, but she sure as hell wasn't acting like her. "You okay?" I asked as I turned off the engine. "You seem a little off tonight." For a second, something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe, or fear, but it was going so fast I might have imagined it. "I'm fine," she said, already reaching for the door handle. "Just want to make a good impression, you know." I didn't know, actually, because in all the years I'd known Bianca, she'd never been the type to get nervous about social situations. She was the one who could walk into a room full of strangers and have half of them eating out of her hand within 10 minutes. Confidence was kind of her thing. But before I could ask any more questions, she was already out of the car and smoothing down her dress again, putting on what I now realize was her game face. I hurried to catch up with her, straightening my tie as we walked toward the entrance. That's when I saw him. Lennox Carter was standing just inside the glass doors, and the moment he spotted Bianca through the windows, his whole face lit up like she was the best thing he'd seen all day. He was a good-looking guy, I'll admit. Tall, well-dressed, with that kind of easy smile that probably made clients want to hand over their credit cards without asking too many questions. But there was something about the way he was looking at my wife that made every instinct I had start screaming. When we walked through the doors, Lennox stepped forward immediately, and I watched as his eyes did this quick sweep over Bianca from her face down to her shoes and back up again, like he was appraising a piece of art he was thinking about buying. "Bianca," he said, and his voice was warm in a way that felt too familiar, too intimate for a boss greeting an employee. "You look incredible tonight." She smiled, actually smiled, the first real expression I'd seen from her all evening, and said, "Thank you, Lennox. You clean up pretty well yourself." And that's when I knew. Maybe not the whole truth, not yet, but enough to understand that whatever was happening between them had been going on for a while. The way they looked at each other, the comfortable rhythm of their conversation, the fact that he hadn't even acknowledged my existence yet, it all pointed to something I really didn't want to think about. Finally, Lennox turned to me with that practice smile of his, the one he probably used on clients he didn't particularly like, but had to be nice to anyway. "And you must be Jared," he said, extending his hand. "We've heard so much about you." "Yeah," I thought as I shook his hand and felt him squeeze just a little too hard. "I'll bet you have." Following Lennox inside felt like walking into some kind of fever dream. The venue was one of those places that screamed money from every surface. Crystal chandeliers hanging from a vaded ceiling, marble floors so polished you could probably shave in their reflection, and walls lined with abstract art that probably cost more than I made in a year. Everything glittered under the warm lighting, and the sound of laughter and conversation echoed off the hard surfaces in a way that made me feel like I was walking into an echo chamber of privilege. I stuck close to Bianca as we moved through the crowd, but it was like watching her transform into someone I barely recognized. The distant, nervous woman from the car ride had vanished, replaced by this confident, social butterfly who seemed to know everyone and light up every conversation she joined. It was impressive, honestly, but also kind of unsettling, like watching an actress slip into character right in front of your eyes. Her coworkers swarmed around her almost immediately, a mix of men and women in designer clothes who all had that particular look of people who spent too much money on things that were supposed to make them look effortless. They complimented her dress, her hair, her earrings, and she ate it up like she'd been starving for attention all week. "Bianca, you look absolutely radiant tonight," gushed this redhead in a black cocktail dress who I vaguely remembered meeting at some company Christmas party years ago. "That dress is stunning on you," added another woman with perfectly straight blonde hair and lips so glossy they reflected the chandelier light. "You have to tell us where you got those shoes," chimed in a third, and suddenly Bianca was the center of this little circle of admiration. basking in the attention like a cat in a sunbeam. And me? I might as well have been invisible. Not one of them acknowledged my presence. Not a single "nice to see you again, Jared," or "how's the woodworking business?" or even just a polite nod in my direction. I stood there next to my wife like a piece of furniture she'd dragged along and forgotten about. At first, I tried to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they were just excited to see Bianca and would include me in the conversation once the initial hells were over. But as the minutes ticked by and the circle of admirers grew larger, it became pretty clear that I wasn't part of the equation. I was the +1 who didn't matter, the husband who was there to be seen, but not heard. Bianca didn't seem to notice, or if she did, she didn't seem to care. She was in her element, talking shop about upcoming projects and industry trends, laughing at inside jokes I didn't understand, and generally acting like she belonged in this world of expensive taste and designer everything. Eventually someone, I think it was Lennox though, I couldn't see him through the crowd, called for everyone to find their seats for dinner. The group started migrating toward a long table that had been set up in the center of the room, covered with a white tablecloth, so crisp it looked like it had been starched and ironed that afternoon. Gold-rimmed plates caught the light from the chandeliers, and crystal glasses stood at attention like little soldiers waiting for orders. Each place setting had a small white card with elegant script writing, the kind of calligraphy that probably cost more per letter than most people spend on groceries. People were wandering around the table looking for their names, chatting and laughing as they found their assigned spots. I followed Bianca around the table's perimeter, watching her scan the place cards with the focused intensity of someone taking a test. When she found hers, positioned about halfway down the table's length, she smiled and touched the card lightly with her fingertip. "Here I am," she said, then looked around for mine. "You should be right around here somewhere." I started checking the cards near hers, expecting to find my name on one of the neighboring spots. Jared Winslow maybe, or Mr. Winslow if they were being formal. But as I moved from card to card, I wasn't seeing my name anywhere. Then I found it. The card was positioned directly across from Bianca's seat. And at first glance, I thought there had been some kind of mistake. The calligraphy was beautiful, just like all the others, but the words didn't make sense. I picked up the card and read it again, certain I was misunderstanding something. But no, there it was. An elegant script that had probably taken someone 20 minutes to perfect. Clueless, idiot, trash. I stood there holding the card, staring at those 3 words like they were written in a foreign language I was trying to translate. This had to be wrong. This had to be some kind of printing error. Or maybe the cards had gotten mixed up somehow. There was no way, absolutely no way, that someone had deliberately written this. But as I looked around the table, I started noticing things. The way conversations had gotten quieter. The way people were glancing in my direction and then quickly looking away. The way Bianca was standing frozen next to her chair, her face pale under her carefully applied makeup. And then it started. The laughter. It began as a snicker from somewhere behind me, then grew into a chuckle, then exploded into full-blown, stomach-holding tears in the eyes. Laughter that filled the entire room. Person after person joined in, until the sound was bouncing off the marble floors and crystal chandeliers like some kind of acoustic nightmare. Lennox was laughing the hardest, his face red with the effort of it, one hand pressed to his chest like he was trying to keep his heart from bursting with joy. Someone, I couldn't see who through the blur that was starting to cloud my vision, shouted, "Beggar!" And the laughter got even louder. And my wife, who was supposed to be on my side, who was supposed to have my back no matter what, was giggling. Not laughing outright like the others, but giggling like a teenager who just heard the best joke of her life. That's when I understood this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't some cruel prank that had gotten out of hand. This was planned. This was deliberate. And Bianca, the woman I'd loved and supported and built a life with, had been in on it from the beginning. Standing there with that damn place card in my hand, surrounded by the sound of their laughter echoing off every polished surface in the room, I felt something inside me just break. Not snap like you'd expect, but break slowly, like a piece of wood that's been carrying too much weight for too long and finally gives up trying to hold everything together. The logical part of my brain, the part that had gotten me through 8 years of marriage and built a successful business from nothing, was screaming at me to do something. Flip the table, throw the card in Lennox's smug face, tell every single one of these pretentious exactly what I thought of their little joke. Walk out, make a scene, demand some goddamn respect. But I didn't do any of that. Instead, I just stood there like an idiot, holding that card and watching their faces, really watching them, memorizing every detail of this moment so I'd never forget what it felt like to realize that the people I'd been trying to impress thought I was nothing more than entertainment. A punchline to a joke I hadn't even known was being told. Lennox was practically doubled over, his perfect hair falling into his eyes as he laughed. The redhead from earlier had her hand pressed to her mouth like she was trying to contain herself, but her shoulders were shaking with the effort of holding it in. The blonde with the glossy lips was wiping tears from her eyes, careful not to smudge her makeup. And Bianca, Jesus, Bianca was the worst part of all. She wasn't laughing as hard as the others, but she was definitely laughing, covering it up with her hand, trying to look embarrassed about it, but not embarrassed enough to stop, not embarrassed enough to defend me, not embarrassed enough to tell her coworkers that this was her husband. They were humiliating. That's when she leaned in close to me, close enough that I could smell her perfume and feel her breath on my ear, and whispered, "It's just a joke, Jared. Don't embarrass me. Don't embarrass her." Those 4 words hit me harder than all the laughter combined, because right there, in that whispered plea, was everything I needed to know about where I stood in my wife's world. I wasn't her partner. I wasn't her equal. I was a potential source of embarrassment that she had to manage and control. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something in her eyes that I'd probably been missing for months, maybe years. She wasn't ashamed of what her coworkers had done. She was worried about what I might do in response. She was worried that I might ruin her image, might make her look bad in front of the people she was trying so hard to impress. The laughter was starting to die down now, replaced by expectant silence as everyone waited to see how I'd react. Would I lose my temper? Would I storm out? Would I give them the dramatic scene they were probably hoping for? I felt my fingers tighten around the napkin that had been placed next to the offensive place card. For a second, I imagined what it would feel like to flip that perfectly set table to send all those gold-rimmed plates and crystal glasses crashing to the marble floor. To tell Lennox exactly what I thought of him and his amateur hour power place. To grab Bianca's arm and drag her out of there like a man with some self-respect would do. But I didn't do any of that either. Instead, I set the place card down carefully on the table, pulled out the chair, and sat down slowly, deliberately, like a man who had all the time in the world, and nowhere else he'd rather be. The silence that followed was different from the expectant quiet that had come after the laughter. This was uncomfortable silence, confused silence. They'd set up their little trap expecting fireworks, and instead they got nothing. Just a guy calmly taking his assigned seat at their fancy dinner table. I spread the napkin across my lap and looked around the table, making eye contact with each person who had been laughing just moments before. Not in an aggressive way, not like I was trying to stare them down or intimidate them. Just looking, taking inventory, counting faces, and filing away names for future reference. Because here's the thing about people like this. People who think they're better than everyone else. People who find their entertainment in humiliating others. They don't know what to do when their target refuses to play the victim. They expect anger. They expect hurt feelings and dramatic exits and maybe some crying. What they don't expect is calm acceptance. Lennox was the first to break. He cleared his throat and said, "Come on, Jared. It's just a little fun. We're all creative types here. We have a sense of humor." I nodded politely and reached for my water glass. "I can see that," I said, my voice steady and conversational. "Very creative." Bianca was staring at me from across the table, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her head as she tried to figure out what I was thinking. Good. Let her wonder. Let her sit there in her beautiful silk dress and wonder what was going through her husband's mind. The truth was, I wasn't sure myself. All I knew was that something fundamental had shifted in the last few minutes. The man who had walked into this restaurant trying to make a good impression on his wife's coworkers was gone. In his place was someone I didn't entirely recognize yet. Someone who was done caring what these people thought of him. Someone who was just getting started. I picked up the offensive place card again and studied it like I was examining a piece of craftsmanship. The calligraphy really was beautiful. I had to admit someone had put real effort into making my humiliation look elegant. "You know," I said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, "this is really nice work, very professional. I'm curious, who's the artist?" The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Nobody wanted to claim credit now that the joke had fallen flat. I smiled and placed the card carefully next to my plate, like it was something precious I wanted to keep as a memento. "Well," I said, "whoever it was, they've got real talent." And then I waited to see what would happen next. The first course arrived with all the pomp and circumstance you'd expect from a place that charged more for one meal than most people spend on groceries in a month. Some kind of fancy salad with ingredients I couldn't pronounce, arranged on plates that looked like they belonged in an art museum. The servers moved around the table with practiced precision, setting down each plate like they were handling rare artifacts. And suddenly, everyone had something to focus on besides the elephant in the room, or rather the clueless idiot trash sitting at their perfectly appointed table. I ate slowly, methodically, making sure to use the right fork from the collection they'd laid out beside my plate. Years of watching Bianca navigate these kinds of social situations had taught me a thing or two about proper etiquette, even if I'd never had much occasion to use it. Every bite was deliberate. Every sip of wine calculated to show these people that I wasn't going anywhere, wasn't going to be rushed or intimidated into leaving. The conversation gradually resumed around me, but it was forced now, artificial in a way that hadn't been there before. People were trying too hard to act normal, like nothing had happened, but I could feel their eyes on me whenever they thought I wasn't looking, waiting for me to crack maybe, or trying to figure out what my game was. About halfway through the main course, some pretentious piece of fish that probably had its own Wikipedia page, Lennox finally made his move. He'd been quiet during most of the meal, which surprised me. I'd expected him to be the type who couldn't let a moment of silence pass without filling it with the sound of his own voice. But he'd been patient, waiting for the right moment to strike. He leaned back in his chair, wine glass in hand, and fixed me with that smug smile of his, the one that said he knew something I didn't, that he was operating on a level I couldn't possibly understand. It was the kind of smile that probably worked great on clients and subordinates, but it just made me want to see how long it would take to wipe it off his face. "You know, Jared," he said, his voice carrying that casual authority that comes with being used to having people listen when you talk, "I have to say, you're taking this whole thing a lot better than I expected." The table got quiet again. Not the uncomfortable silence from before, but the kind of focused attention you get when everyone knows something important is about to happen. Even the servers seemed to sense it, hanging back near the kitchen doors instead of circulating with their wine bottles and water pitchers. "Am I?" I asked, cutting another piece of my fish with the precise movements I used when I was working on a particularly delicate joint. "What exactly were you expecting?" Lennox's smile widened, and I could see him settling into what he probably thought was going to be a fun little power play. The kind of verbal chess match he was used to winning because he held all the cards and made all the rules. Well, he said, swirling his wine like he was some kind of seer, most people would be pretty upset about finding a place card like that. Might even cause a scene, storm out, maybe throw a few accusations around. He paused to take a sip, clearly enjoying himself. But you're just sitting there, calm as can be. It's interesting. I nodded thoughtfully, like he just shared some profound insight about human nature. You seem to know a lot about how most people would react to being humiliated at a dinner party. Experience, he said with a shrug that was meant to look casual, but came across as practiced. You deal with enough different personality types in this business. You start to recognize patterns. I bet you do. I took a sip of my own wine, which was admittedly pretty good, even if I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of saying so. Must be nice being able to predict how people will behave. Makes it easier to manipulate them, I'd imagine. That got a reaction. Not a big one. Lennox was too smooth for that, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes, the way his smile became just a fraction less natural. He wasn't used to people calling him out so directly, especially not in front of an audience. Manipulate is a strong word, he said, but his voice had lost some of its casual confidence. I prefer to think of it as social dynamics, understanding what makes people tick, right? I leaned forward slightly, matching his casual posture. So when you had someone write clueless idiot trash on my place card, that was just you understanding what makes me tick. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the soft jazz music they had playing in the background, something I hadn't even noticed before. Lennox's smile faltered for just a moment before he managed to prop it back up. But it was too late. Everyone at the table had seen it slip. Relax, Jared, he said, and now there was an edge to his voice that hadn't been there before. We're all creative types here. We have a sense of humor. You can't take everything so seriously. There it was, the deflection. The attempt to make me the problem for not appreciating their little joke. It was exactly what I'd expected and exactly what I'd been waiting for. I looked around the table, making eye contact with each person who had been laughing earlier. Some of them were staring at their plates now, suddenly fascinated by their food. Others were watching the exchange with the kind of morbid curiosity you get when you're watching a car accident happen in slow motion. Then I looked at Bianca. She was sitting perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her face carefully neutral, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she was holding herself like she was braced for impact. She knew what was coming, even if she didn't know exactly what form it would take. You're absolutely right, Lennox, I said, my voice as calm and measured as it had been all evening. I should definitely relax. After all, what's a little humiliation between friends? I raised my wine glass in a mock toast, and the gesture was so unexpected that a few people actually lifted their glasses in response before they realized what they were doing. Two creative types, I said loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear and their sense of humor. Lennox was still smiling, but it looked painted on now, like a mask that was starting to crack around the edges. He raised his own glass, probably because he didn't know what else to do. And that's when I knew I had him. Because here's the thing about bullies. They're only comfortable when they're in control, when they can predict how their victims will react, when they can stay one step ahead of the conversation. But when someone refuses to play by their rules, when someone turns their own game against them, they don't know what to do with themselves. And Lennox Carter was about to find out just how creative a simple woodworker could be. The rest of the meal passed in a kind of suspended animation, like everyone at the table was holding their breath, waiting for something to explode. Dessert came. Some elaborate chocolate thing that probably took 3 pastry chefs and a degree in engineering to construct. And I ate every bite, making sure to compliment the presentation loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. The wine kept flowing. Conversations resumed in fits and starts, but there was an undercurrent of tension running through everything now that nobody could quite shake off. Lennox had retreated into damage control mode, working overtime to charm the other guests and restore the jovial atmosphere he'd been orchestrating all evening. But I could see the calculation behind every laugh, every casual gesture, every attempt to get things back on track. The man was rattled, even if he was doing his best to hide it. Bianca hadn't said a word to me since her whispered plea not to embarrass her. She was playing the part of the sophisticated professional, engaging in animated conversations about upcoming projects and industry trends. But I caught her glancing in my direction more than once, trying to read my mood maybe, or figure out what I was planning to do next. The truth was I wasn't entirely sure myself. Something had shifted inside me during that exchange with Linux, something fundamental that I couldn't quite put my finger on yet. It was like walking into my workshop and realizing that all my tools had been rearranged. Everything looked familiar, but the relationships between things had changed in ways that would take time to fully understand. What I didn't know was that I was done being the joke, done being the husband who was supposed to smile and nod and be grateful for whatever scraps of respect these people felt like throwing my way, done pretending that what had happened tonight was acceptable or funny, or anything other than a calculated attempt to put me in my place. As the evening wound down and people started checking their phones and making noises about early meetings tomorrow, I made my decision. Not the explosive table-flipping decision that part of me still wanted to make, but something more surgical, more precise. I waited until the servers had cleared away the last of the dessert plates and people were starting to push back from the table. That moment when a formal dinner begins its transition into casual conversation and eventual departure. Then I stood up, smoothed down my tie, and began walking around the table toward the head where Vincent Maddox had been holding court all evening. Vincent was Reinhardt and Rowe's president, a man in his early 60s with silver hair and the kind of presence that came from decades of closing deals and managing personalities. I'd met him exactly once before, about 3 years ago, when I'd done some custom mill work for their office renovation. He'd been impressed with my craftsmanship then, had even mentioned something about how rare it was to find someone who understood the importance of quality in a world full of shortcuts and cheap alternatives. As I approached, Vincent looked up from his conversation with a woman I didn't recognize. Some client or potential partner, judging by the way she was dressed and the intensity of their discussion. He smiled when he saw me coming, the kind of polite, slightly confused smile you give someone you recognize but can't quite place. "Jared, isn't it?" he said, extending his hand. "Good to see you again. How's the woodworking business?" "It's going well, thank you for asking," I replied, shaking his hand with the firm grip my father had taught me when I was 12 years old. "Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone, scrolling through my photos until I found the one I'd taken earlier. The place card in all its elegant, insulting glory, captured in perfect detail on my phone's camera. I'd snapped the picture while everyone was distracted by their salads, some instinct telling me I might need evidence of what had happened here tonight. "This is how your VP and your staff chose to welcome me to your company's annual dinner," I said, holding the phone so Vincent could see the screen clearly. The change in his expression was immediate and dramatic. The polite smile vanished, replaced by something between shock and horror as he read those 3 words written in beautiful calligraphy. He took the phone from my hands, studying the image like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. "This is," he started, then stopped, his face flushing red with what I hoped was embarrassment and anger. "Jared, I am so sorry. This is not who we are as a company. This is not how we treat anyone, let alone the contractor who's been providing your firm with custom cabinetry and installations for the past 6 years. I finished for him. The same contractor who built those conference room shelves you complimented last month, and the reception desk that 3 different design magazines have photographed for feature articles." Vincent's flush deepened, and I could see him processing not just the immediate insult, but all the broader implications. The potential legal exposure, the damage to the company's reputation if this got out, the complete failure of leadership that had allowed something like this to happen under his watch. "Jared, please," he said, his voice taking on the careful tone of someone trying to defuse a bomb. "Let me make this right. This is completely unacceptable, and whoever was responsible will face serious consequences." "But surely we can, Vincent," I interrupted, keeping my voice calm and professional. "I appreciate the apology, I really do. But I think we both know that apologies don't fix this kind of thing. Trust, once it's broken, doesn't just snap back together like a piece of wood with some glue and clamps." I took my phone back and slipped it into my pocket, then looked him directly in the eye with the same steady gaze I used when I was explaining a complicated joint to a client who didn't understand why quality took time. "Effective tonight," I said, each word clear and deliberate. "I'm cutting all ties with Reinhardt and Rowe. No more custom work. No more installations. No more partnership of any kind. Craftwise Builds will be finding clients who understand the value of respect." The silence that followed was absolute. Vincent stared at me like I just told him his building was on fire, and I could sense rather than see the attention of everyone else at the table shifting in our direction. This was the scene they'd been waiting for all evening, just not the one they'd expected. "You don't have to do this," Vincent said quietly. "We can work something out. Make amends, surely." But I was already walking away, heading for the exit with the measured pace of a man who had said everything that needed to be said. Behind me, I could hear Vincent's voice, sharp with authority now instead of apology. "Lennox, my office. First thing Monday morning." I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The empire was already starting to crack. Walking out of the Meridian felt like stepping out of a fever dream and back into the real world. The cool night air hit my face, cutting through the fog of wine and adrenaline that had been building all evening. And for the first time in hours, I could actually breathe properly. My hands weren't shaking. I was surprised to discover that, and my heart rate was steady, like I'd just finished a particularly satisfying piece of craftsmanship, rather than blown up my wife's career and probably my marriage in the span of 5 minutes. I made it about halfway to my car before I heard the click of heels on pavement behind me. Bianca's voice cut through the night air like a saw blade hitting a nail. Jared, wait." I stopped, but didn't turn around. Not yet. I needed another few seconds to figure out what I was going to say to her, how I was going to handle this conversation that had been building for years without either of us realizing it. "What the hell was that?" she demanded, slightly out of breath from trying to catch up with me in those designer heels. "What were you thinking?" Now I turned around. She looked different out here under the parking lot lights, smaller somehow, less polished than she had inside the restaurant. Her perfect hair was starting to come loose from its elegant twist, and there was something wild in her eyes that I hadn't seen since we were younger and used to fight about money and the future, and all those things that seem so important when you're still figuring out who you're going to be. "I was thinking," I said carefully, "that I was tired of being treated like garbage by people who wouldn't know real craftsmanship if it hit them in the face. It was just a joke, Jared." The words came out sharper than she probably intended, echoing off the cars around us. A stupid, harmless joke that you turned into this nuclear option. Harmless. I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. "Bianca, they called me clueless idiot trash at a company dinner. Your company dinner. Your boss, who I'm pretty sure you're sleeping with, by the way, orchestrated the whole thing, and you sat there and laughed along with them." She flinched like I'd slapped her, and I knew I'd hit the mark about Lennox. The affair had been obvious to everyone except me, apparently, and even I had finally figured it out. "That's not, we're not." She started, then stopped, her shoulders sagging as she realized there was no point in denying something that was written all over her face. "It's complicated, Jared." "No," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "It's really not. You either respect your husband or you don't. You either stand up for him when people humiliate him or you don't. There's nothing complicated about it. She was crying now, mascara starting to streak down her cheeks in thin black lines. You don't understand the pressure I'm under at work. The politics, the competition. I can't afford to make waves right now. Not when I'm so close to making senior partner. So, you threw me under the bus instead. I didn't mean for it to go that far. I thought you'd just laugh it off. Maybe make some self-deprecating joke and then everyone would move on. I never thought you'd... What? Stand up for myself? Have some self-respect? The silence stretched between us, filled with all the things we'd never said to each other over the years. All the small compromises and accommodations that had seemed reasonable at the time, but had apparently been building up to this moment in a parking lot outside a restaurant where I'd just torched the professional relationship that had been keeping us financially comfortable. Do you have any idea what you've done? She asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent's going to fire Lennox, maybe some of the others too. And when word gets out about this, about what happened? Good, I said, and I meant it. Maybe next time they'll think twice before humiliating someone for their own entertainment. This isn't just about them, Jared. This is about us, about our life together. Reinhardt and Rowe was our biggest client. Do you realize how much money we're going to lose? The word came out harder than I intended. When exactly did your affair with your boss become our problem, Bianca? She didn't answer that, just stood there crying in the parking lot while the valet attendants pretended not to notice the domestic drama playing out in front of their fancy restaurant. I pulled my car keys out of my pocket, the familiar weight of them grounding me in something real and solid. I'm going home, I said. We can finish this conversation when you're ready to be honest about what's really been going on. Jared, please. She reached out like she was going to touch my arm, then seemed to think better of it. Can't we find a way to fix this? I looked at her, standing there in her beautiful silk dress, her makeup ruined and her carefully constructed professional image crumbling around her. And I felt something that might have been pity, if I'd had any emotional energy left to spare. Some things can't be fixed, Bianca, I said. Some things are just broken. I got in my car and drove away, leaving her standing under the parking lot lights. In my rearview mirror, I could see her pulling out her phone, probably calling Lennox to do damage control to figure out how to spin this disaster into something manageable. But as I drove through the quiet streets toward home, toward my workshop and my tools, and the honest work that had never once made me feel small or worthless, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't broken. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time in my entire marriage, I felt completely, solidly whole. The empire they'd built on other people's humiliation was cracking. All right. And I was the one holding the sledgehammer. The first 3 days after the dinner were eerily quiet. I went about my usual routine. Coffee at 5:30, workshop by 6, working on the current projects I had lined up. But it felt different somehow, like I was moving through a world that had fundamentally changed while I slept. Bianca hadn't come home that night, and she hadn't called either. Her absence filled the house like smoke, seeping into every room and making everything feel temporary and uncertain. On Wednesday morning, I was putting the finishing touches on a jewelry box for Mrs. Peterson down on Elm Street when I heard the mail truck rumble up our driveway. Usually I wouldn't have bothered checking it until evening. Bills and junk mail could wait. But something made me walk to the mailbox that day. Maybe it was intuition, or maybe it was just the need to do something normal in a week that had been anything but. The first envelope I pulled out had the Reinhardt and Rowe letterhead embossed at the top, and for a second my stomach dropped. Some kind of legal threat, maybe, or a demand for payment on work I'd already completed. But when I tore it open, I found something I hadn't expected. An apology letter from Vincent Maddox written on company letterhead and signed in his distinctive handwriting. Dear Jared, It read, "I want to personally apologize for the unconscionable treatment you received at our company dinner. What happened that evening goes against every value this firm claims to represent, and I take full responsibility for creating an environment where such behavior was possible. While I know this doesn't undo the damage that was done, please know that significant personnel changes are being made to ensure nothing like this ever happens again. Your craftsmanship and professionalism have always been exemplary, and losing your partnership is a loss this company will regret for years to come." I read it twice, then set it aside and opened the second letter. This one was from someone named Delilah Morrison, a name I vaguely remembered from introductions at the dinner, but couldn't attach to a face. The handwriting was neat and precise, like someone who'd taken time to think about every word. "Dear Mr. Winslow," it began. "You don't know me well, but I was seated 3 chairs down from you at Friday's dinner. I work in the design department at Reinhardt & Rowe, and I wanted you to know that not everyone at that table found what happened to you amusing. In fact, I was so disgusted by the whole thing that I recorded Lennox Carter bragging about the joke to several coworkers before you arrived. I thought you should know that this wasn't just cruel. It was planned well in advance, and Lennox seemed to take particular pleasure in describing how humiliated you were going to be." My hands tightened on the letter as I kept reading. I've attached a copy of the recording to this letter. I'm not sure what you plan to do with it, but I thought you deserved to know the truth about how premeditated this attack on your dignity really was. I've also taken the liberty of sharing this recording with several people in the industry who I thought should know what kind of man Lennox Carter really is. Word travels fast in our business, and I suspect his reputation is going to suffer considerably in the coming weeks. The third envelope was thicker, official-looking, with a return address I didn't recognize. Inside was a contract from Archer & Moore Studios, one of Reinhardt & Rose's biggest competitors, offering me an exclusive partnership to handle all their custom millwork and installations. The terms were better than anything I'd had with Reinhardt & Rowe. Higher rates, more creative freedom, and a clause that guaranteed me credit in any magazine features or design awards. There was a handwritten note attached from someone named Patricia Archer. "We've heard about your situation through industry channels, and we want you to know that we've always admired your work. We believe that character and craftsmanship go hand in hand, and we'd be honored to have you as a partner. If you're interested, please call me at your earliest convenience." By Thursday, my phone was ringing off the hook. Architects I'd worked with years ago, developers who'd seen my work in other people's projects, even a few residential clients who'd heard about what happened and wanted to offer their support. Word was spreading through the construction and design community faster than I'd thought possible, and apparently the story wasn't painting Reinhardt & Rowe in a very flattering light. "I heard about what those jackasses did to you," said Tom Rodriguez, a contractor I collaborated with on several projects over the years. "Hell, Jared, everybody's heard about it by now." That recording Delilah Morrison's been sharing around has made Lennox Carter about as popular as a tax audit. Nobody wants to work with those people anymore. "What recording?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I knew. "You haven't heard it yet, man? You need to listen to this thing. Carter's basically bragging about how he came up with the idea to humiliate you, talking about how funny it was going to be to watch you squirm. Real class act, that guy. Anyway, the reason I'm calling is I've got 3 clients who specifically asked if I knew how to get in touch with you. Seems like people respect a man who stands up for himself." Friday brought more of the same: a custom kitchen job in Westchester, a built-in library for a law firm downtown, even an inquiry from a hotel chain about doing mill work for their entire East Coast expansion. My appointment book, which had been looking pretty sparse after cutting ties with Reinhardt & Rowe, was suddenly packed solid for the next 6 months. That evening I was in the workshop organizing all the new contracts and proposals when my phone rang one more time. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer it anyway. "Is this Jared Winslow from Craftwise Builds?" The voice was warm, professional, with just a hint of a southern accent. Yes, this is Jared. Mr. Winslow, my name is Michael Chun, and I'm a producer for a home renovation show on the Home and Garden Network. We've been hearing some interesting stories about you this week, and we're wondering if you might be interested in discussing a potential partnership. I almost laughed. A week ago, I'd been sitting at a dinner table being treated like trash by people who thought they were better than me. Now, television producers were calling to offer me work. What kind of partnership? I asked. We're developing a new series about craftsmen who prioritize quality and integrity over profit margins. Men and women who do things the right way, even when the wrong way would be easier. From what we've heard, you might be exactly the kind of person we're looking for. I looked around my workshop, at the tools my father had given me, at the projects in various stages of completion, at the honest work that had never once made me feel small or worthless. And I smiled. Tell me more, I said, because sometimes when one door closes, the whole damn world opens up. By Monday morning, the house had developed a kind of echo that hadn't been there before. Every footstep seemed too loud. Every door closing sounded like a gunshot, and the coffee maker's morning gurgle filled the kitchen with a loneliness I'd never noticed when Bianca was around to share it. I'd gotten used to her absence over the past week. The empty side of the bed, the bathroom counter clear of her products, the refrigerator staying exactly as full as I'd left it. But I hadn't expected the silence to feel so heavy. I was sitting at the kitchen table going through the stack of new contracts that seemed to grow every day when I heard her key in the front door. It was just past 7 in the morning, earlier than she'd ever voluntarily gotten up in all the years we'd been married. And something about the timing told me this wasn't going to be a casual conversation about getting back together. She appeared in the kitchen doorway looking like she'd aged 5 years in the past week. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wasn't wearing any makeup, and the designer clothes had been replaced by jeans and a sweater that had seen better days. But it was her eyes that really caught my attention. Red-rimmed and hollow, like she'd been crying for days and had finally run out of tears. "We need to talk," she said, her voice in smaller than I'd ever heard it. I gestured to the chair across from me, the same spot where she used to sit every morning reading industry blogs on her tablet while I ate breakfast and planned out my day. She sat down carefully, like the chair might collapse under her weight, and for a long moment, we just looked at each other across the table that had once felt like the center of our shared life. "Vincent fired me," she said finally, the words coming out flat and matter-of-fact, like she was reading them from a script she'd memorized. Not officially. They're calling it a voluntary resignation pending ethics review, but we both know what that means. My career at Reinhardt and Rowe is over. I nodded but didn't say anything. What was there to say? That I was sorry, that I hadn't meant for things to go that far. Both would have been lies, and we'd had enough lies between us to last several lifetimes. Lennox is gone too. She continued, staring at her hands folded on the table. Vincent gave him the choice between resigning quietly or being terminated for cause. He chose to resign, but words already gotten out about what happened. That recording Delilah made, it's everywhere now. Industry blogs, social media, even some of the trade magazines picked it up. His reputation is destroyed. She looked up at me then, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not anger or hurt or even regret, but a kind of bewildered confusion, like she was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't have enough pieces. "Why did you do that to me?" she asked, and her voice cracked on the last word. "Why did you have to take it so far? It was just a stupid joke, Jared. A mean, thoughtless joke that got out of hand. But you turned it into this nuclear weapon that destroyed everything we'd built together." I set down the contract I'd been pretending to read and really looked at her. This woman I'd loved for 8 years, who I'd supported through career changes and family drama, and all the normal ups and downs that come with building a life with someone. She was sitting 3 feet away from me, but she might as well have been on another planet. "You still don't get it, do you?" I said quietly. "This isn't about the joke, Bianca. This isn't about one night at one dinner where people decided to have a laugh at my expense." "Then what is it about?" she demanded, and now there was some fire in her voice. Some of the old Bianca showing through the exhaustion and defeat. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you threw away 8 years of marriage and our entire financial future because you couldn't take a little ribbing from my coworkers." "A little ribbing?" I repeated the words slowly, like I was tasting something bitter. "Is that really what you think happened? You think your boss, your lover, had someone write clueless idiot trash on my place card as friendly banter?" She flinched at the word lover, but didn't deny it. We were past the point of pretending now, past the point of careful euphemisms and plausible deniability. "It wasn't supposed to go that far," she said, and I could hear the desperation creeping into her voice. "Lennox said it would be just a quick laugh, something to break the tension at the dinner. He said, you'd probably make some self-deprecating joke about it, and then everyone would move on. I never thought, you never thought I'd have enough self-respect to stand up for myself." I finished for her. "You thought I'd just sit there and take it like I always do. Like I did when your friends made comments about my little woodworking hobby. Like I did when you started working late every night and coming home smelling like someone else's cologne. Like I did when you stopped wearing your wedding ring because it didn't go with your professional image." The silence that followed was different from the empty quiet that had been filling the house all week. This was loaded silence, packed with all the things we'd been avoiding for months, maybe years. "I didn't stop wearing my ring because of my image," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," I agreed. "You stopped wearing it because you'd already checked out of this marriage. The dinner was just the first time you let me see it." She started crying then, not the dramatic tears from the parking lot, but the quiet, helpless crying of someone who knows they've lost something important and doesn't know how to get it back. I watched her shoulders shake, listened to the soft sounds of her grief, and felt absolutely nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity. Just nothing. "I made a mistake," she said through her tears. "I made a lot of mistakes, but I love you, Jared. I know I haven't been showing it lately, but I do love you. Can't we find a way to fix this? Can't we start over?" I looked at her sitting there in our kitchen crying over the ruins of the life we'd built together, and I realized that the man who might have said yes to that question, the man who would have been grateful for her attention, who would have been willing to pretend none of this had happened if it meant keeping the peace, was gone. "Some things can't be fixed, Bianca," I said, using the same words I'd used in the parking lot. "Some things are just broken." She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "So that's it? 8 years of marriage, and you're just done?" I thought about that question as I looked around the kitchen we'd renovated together 3 years ago, at the custom cabinets I'd built with my own hands, at the breakfast nook where we'd shed of morning conversations about everything and nothing. "Yeah," I said finally. "I think I am." She nodded like she'd been expecting that answer, wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater, and stood up from the table. "I'll have a lawyer contact you about the divorce," she said, her voice steady now. "All business. We can split everything fairly. The house, the savings, everything. Keep the house," I said. I never liked it much anyway. And that was the truth. I'd never felt at home in this place with its open floor plans and granite countertops and carefully curated decorations. It was Bianca's house. Bianca's vision of what successful people were supposed to want. I belonged in my workshop, surrounded by the smell of wood shavings and the sound of honest work being done. She walked to the kitchen doorway, then paused and looked back at me one more time. "For what it's worth," she said, I really am sorry about all of it. I know you are, I replied. But sorry doesn't fix broken trust, any more than glue fixes a piece of wood that's been cut with a chainsaw. After she left, the house was quiet again. But this time, the silence didn't feel heavy or oppressive. It felt like freedom. 3 months later, I was standing in the executive conference room of Archer & Moore Studios, watching Patricia Archer run her fingers along the grain of the mahogany table I'd just finished installing. The morning sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, catching the natural patterns in the wood and making them glow like they were lit from within. It was the kind of moment that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with woodworking in the first place. Not for the money or the recognition, but for the simple pleasure of creating something beautiful that would outlast the person who made it. This is extraordinary work, Jared, Patricia said, her voice filled with the kind of genuine appreciation I'd rarely heard at Reinhardt & Rowe. The joinery is flawless, and the way you've matched the grain across the entire surface. It's like looking at a single piece of wood that just happened to grow in the shape of a conference table. I smiled and ran my own hand along the surface, feeling the smoothness that had taken 3 coats of hand-rubbed finish and countless hours of sanding to achieve. That's the idea. Most people rush the matching process, but if you take the time to really study the wood to understand how it wants to fit together, you can create something that looks like nature intended it that way. Well, our clients are going to be impressed, Patricia said, pulling out her phone to take photos. Speaking of which, the Meridian Hotel Group loved the samples you sent for their downtown project. They want to move forward with the full contract, all the lobby furniture, the front desk, and the millwork for their premium suites. It's a 6-figure deal, Jared. Probably the biggest single contract you've ever taken on. The irony wasn't lost on me. The Meridian Hotel Group was the same company that owned the Meridian restaurant where my marriage had essentially ended over a place card and a room full of cruel laughter. Now they were offering me the kind of work that would establish Craftwise Builds as a major player in the luxury hospitality market. What about the timeline? I asked, already mentally calculating the materials I'd need and the additional help I might have to hire. They want to break ground on the project next month with the millwork installation scheduled for early fall. I know it's ambitious, but they specifically requested you after seeing some photos of your previous work. Apparently word has gotten around about your, shall we say, principled approach to business. That was Patricia's diplomatic way of referring to what had happened at Reinhardt & Rowe. The story had become something of a legend in the design and construction community. The craftsman who'd walked away from a lucrative partnership rather than tolerate disrespect. It had opened doors I never would have imagined, brought me clients who valued integrity as much as skill, and turned Craftwise Builds from a one-man operation into something that was starting to resemble a real company. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced down to see it was from Tom Rodriguez, the contractor who'd been one of the first to call after the dinner incident. Just saw the article in Architectural Digest. The message read, "You're famous now, my friend. Well deserved." I frowned and looked at Patricia. "What article?" She grinned and pulled out her tablet, scrolling through until she found what she was looking for. I was going to mention this, but I wanted to wait until we finished discussing the hotel project. Take a look. The article was titled, "Integrity in the Age of Instagram: Why One Craftsman Stand for Respect is Reshaping the Industry." And it featured a full-page photo of me in my workshop, surrounded by the tools and projects that define my daily life. The piece went on to describe what had happened at the Reinhardt & Rowe dinner, but not in a sensational or gossipy way. Instead, it focused on the broader issues of respect, professionalism, and the value of skilled craftsmanship in a world that often prioritized flash over substance. They interviewed Vincent Maddox, Patricia said, pointing to a quote halfway down the page. He called losing your partnership one of the biggest professional regrets of my career, and said the company had implemented new policies to ensure that kind of behavior never happens again. I scrolled down and found another quote, this one from Delilah Morrison, who had apparently left Reinhardt and Rose shortly after the dinner incident to start her own design consultancy. Jared Winslow showed all of us that there's a difference between being professional and being a doormat. She'd said his willingness to walk away from a toxic situation, even at personal cost, has inspired a lot of people in this industry to examine their own standards and boundaries. The article went on to mention that several other contractors and craftspeople had come forward with their own stories of mistreatment at various firms, leading to what one industry expert called a long overdue conversation about workplace culture. In the design world, there's more, Patricia said, turning the tablet to show me another section. They're featuring your work in next month's issue. The jewelry box you made for your anniversary, some of the custom cabinets from your residential projects, and preliminary sketches for the hotel project. You're going to be the cover story. I stared at the screen, trying to process the fact that my face was going to be on the cover of one of the most prestigious design magazines in the country. A year ago, I'd been grateful for the occasional mention in Reinhardt and Rose marketing materials. Now, I was apparently some kind of industry spokesperson for integrity and quality craftsmanship. How does it feel? Patricia asked, studying my expression. Being the face of the movement to bring respect back to skilled trades. I thought about that question as I looked around the conference room at the table I'd built with my own hands. At the successful partnership I'd forged with people who valued my work. At the future that was opening up in ways I never could have predicted. Honestly, I said, it feels like coming home. My phone buzzed again, this time with a call from an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Jared Winslow. Mr. Winslow, this is Sarah Chun from the Home and Garden Network. I think my brother Michael spoke with you a few months ago about a potential television project. I remembered the conversation. The producer who'd called about a show featuring craftsmen who prioritized integrity over profit. I'd been interested but hadn't heard back after our initial discussion. Yes, I remember. Well, we've been following your story, and we'd love to move forward with that partnership we discussed. We're looking at a 13-episode first season, focusing on your approach to custom woodworking and the philosophy behind your business practices. Are you still interested? I looked at Patricia, who was grinning like she'd just won the lottery, and thought about how far I'd come from that night at the Meridian when I'd been dismissed as clueless idiot trash. Let's talk, I said, because sometimes when you stand up for yourself and refuse to accept anything less than respect, the whole world notices. And sometimes, just sometimes, they decide to build something better right alongside you. I wasn't Bianca's +1 anymore. I wasn't anybody's afterthought, or comic relief, or convenient target. I was Jared Winslow, craftsman and businessman, cover story and television personality, builder of beautiful things that would outlast all the petty people who'd once thought they were better than me. And I'd never needed their spotlight to shine.